Wednesday, October 22, 2025. Welcome to the podcast, News El Salvador SV, a space for conversation and reflection, where we explore together current topics from El Salvador and around the world. You can contribute your financial support via PayPal or through a Bitcoin QR code. The PayPal link can be found in the content description, and the Bitcoin QR code is on the cover of this episode. When you send your contribution, include in the subject line the reason for your support, something like collaboration, talk about the topic I like, for a coffee, support for your podcast. This is for internal control purposes. Also remember, you can advertise through this space if you're interested. The email address is in the description. Write to us. It will be a pleasure to hear from you. Find us on your favorite platform, on Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcasts. We are on almost all of them as News El Salvador SV.
So today, October 22nd, 2025, wow, the global scene is just full of tension, really, and these huge contrasts. What's really fascinating, I think, is seeing this high-stakes international diplomacy play out, the future of the Ukraine war, things like that. But it's happening right alongside these critical domestic financial realities, especially when you look at El Salvador's economy and how reliant it seems to be becoming. We've got a lot to get through today, a ton of source material, everything from, radical new military doctrines popping up in the Pacific to this huge surge in remittances back home.
Okay, let's dive right in then, starting with that international picture. Because the United States military, they seem to be seriously escalating their anti-drug operations. And it looks like this escalation involves a pretty radical shift in how they're justifying it legally. We've got reports stating pretty bluntly, the United States Army is bombing a narco boat off the coast of Colombia by order of Trump.
Yeah, that quote really jumps out, doesn't it? It flags this new geographic spread and also the intensity. This is the 8th known attack on these presumed drug boats since September 2nd. That's quite a pace. And the key thing here is the shish, the first 7, all in the Caribbean. Now they're operating in the Pacific, off South America. That's a big expansion of the zone.
And when we talk about military action, bombing boats, there's a human cost, obviously, these 8 operations. The reported death toll is already at least 34 people. So this isn't just stopping ships anymore. It's direct kinetic force.
Exactly, kinetic engagement. And that's where the whole thing just blows up into controversy back in the United States. You have Senator Mark Kelly, he's a Democrat. Arizona openly questioning the whole legal basis for this, the constitutionality. Apparently, when administration officials tried to brief lawmakers, they couldn't really give a clear explanation for using lethal military force like this against, non-state actors in international waters. And adding to the confusion, they're apparently basing these actions on some secret list, over 20 supposed narco-terrorist groups, a list they haven't even shared with Congress. Right,
which immediately throws up huge red flags about executive power, oversight, all of that. I mean, it's one thing to authorize a military strike under normal rules of engagement, right? But it's something else entirely to just declare a non-state group a military target without, getting the okay from the legislature.
Yeah.
So what's the administration actually saying? What's their formal justification for calling these groups narco-terrorists and using the military?
Well, they're pushing a very, very aggressive interpretation of international law here. That seems to be the strategy. They're basically saying the United States is already in a kind of conflict, a non-international armed conflict with these drug cartels. And the logic or the justification they're using is the sheer number of deaths within the United States caused by narcotics trafficked by these groups, tens of thousands every year. So they argue that threat is so severe, it crosses the line into armed conflict. And if you accept that designation, it potentially creates a legal loophole. It lets them use the military, maybe bypass some treaties, treat these boats as legitimate military targets for bombing runs. It essentially turns what used to be seen as a law enforcement issue into a full-blown military operation, on foreign shores, no less. It sets a really significant and potentially dangerous precedent for tackling transnational crime groups anywhere in the world.
A dangerous precedent is right. Okay, shifting gears now. Moving from that war on drugs to the big geopolitical fault line in Europe, that highly anticipated summit between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin in Budapest, it's off. Postponed indefinitely. President Trump himself put it pretty bluntly, didn't he? Something like, I don't want a useless meeting, I don't want to waste time, so I'll see what happens.
Yeah, that quote really sums up why the whole peace effort just stalled. fell apart. And the core reason, the sticking point, was the deal Trump put on the table. An immediate ceasefire, freezing the battle lines exactly where they are right now. Russia just flatly said no, rejected it outright. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is apparently very clear about it. Moscow hasn't given up on its original war aims, the whole denazification, demilitarization language. And more to the point, they're insisting they need to conquer the entire Donbas region, Luhansk and Donetsk. That's their absolute minimum condition for claiming any kind of strategic win, accepting the current front line. Politically, for them, it seems that's just not an option right now.
Wow. But the pressure on Ukraine, this would be just immense. Because President Volodymyr Zelensky actually called Trump's proposal, freezing the lines, a good compromise. Mm-hmm. Now, considering how strongly he's always insisted on getting all Ukrainian territory back, including Crimea, that's a huge shift, isn't it? A massive reversal.
Oh, it's a profound concession. Politically, militarily profound. And it really lays bare just how dependent Ukraine is right now. Zelensky's caught in this geopolitical vice, really. He pretty much has to align his language with whatever Trump is pushing because Ukraine's ability to keep fighting depends almost entirely on the flow of American military aid, specifically weapon systems like the long-range Tomahawk missiles, essential for those deep strikes. And just the sheer industrial capacity to keep supplying munitions. Under this administration, only the United States can really guarantee that level of support. So if Zelensky were to push back too hard against Trump's framework, that supply line could just break, leaving Ukraine incredibly exposed. His acceptance isn't really about changing his mind, it seems. It's born out of pure strategic necessity. He's trapped.
And Russia. They certainly didn't miss the timing, did they? Right as this summit collapses, they launch these huge strategic nuclear exercises, personally overseen by Vladimir Putin.
No, the timing was deliberate, classic signaling. They ran a full-scale drill, coordinating all three parts of their nuclear triad. That's always their biggest, loudest message. It's designed purely for deterrence. So you had the ground-launched Yars ICBMs, the Sineva SLBMs fired from submarines, and the Tu-95MS strategic bombers doing air launches. The Kremlin made sure everyone knew all the tasks were completed successfully. And critically, these exercises happened at the exact same time NATO was running its own annual nuclear deterrence drills over in Europe. So the message couldn't be clearer. Russia sees itself as having strategic parity, and it's not going to be pushed around by external pressure when it comes to settling this war.
And the tension around that potential summit, it went right down to the flight path, didn't it? We saw Poland's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, actually threatening publicly to force Putin's plane down if he tried to fly through Polish airspace to get to Budapest, citing the International Criminal Court arrest warrant.
Right. That statement really highlights the tricky legal spot European countries are in. Poland signed the Rome Statute, the treaty that set up the ICC. So arguably, they have a legal duty to execute that warrant if Putin lands on their soil. But then you contrast that with Bulgaria, who said they were ready to offer a safe air corridor. Maybe they aren't signatories, or maybe it was just a political choice prioritizing diplomacy, or maybe regional stability over enforcing the warrant. It just shows how divided Europe still is on how to actually handle this whole situation. There's no single approach.
And amidst all that tension, we also need to mention North Korea popping up again. They launched several short-range ballistic missiles from once. Reached about 800 kilometers, apparently.
Yep. Typical North Korean move, isn't it? Stirring the pot while the big powers are distracted elsewhere. Predictably, it triggered an immediate unified response. The United States, South Korea, Japan, they all condemned it, started joint defense exercises. Just a reminder, really, that even with all eyes on Ukraine, that flashpoint in Asia is still very much live, still highly active.
Okay, let's shift focus now. Away from global conflict toward a major global scandal that's resurfaced. We're talking about the release of Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir. It's titled Nobody's Girl, and it details her horrific experiences within the whole Jeffrey Epstein network.
Yeah, it's a difficult read, but an important one. It brings those abuse allegations right back into focus. I mean, the general story, the timeline, we've known parts of it for years, but the book apparently includes just desgarrador e incompetence totales, as one source put it, disheartening and disturbing details. Giuffre, who sadly passed away earlier this year, she co-wrote this memoir describing just years of sadistic abuse. She explicitly said she lived in constant fear of dying as a sexual slave. Just awful.
And some of the specifics are truly sickening. Descriptions of being beaten, choked, abuse that left her bloodied. And significantly, the memoir mentions a political figure, a former prime minister. She doesn't name him, says he's too powerful, but alleges he was involved in a violent sexual encounter.
Which speaks volumes, doesn't it? Not just about the abuse itself, but about the power structures, the systems that allowed these predators to operate shielded for so long. And predictably, the book's release has put Prince Andrew right back under intense scrutiny. Public pressure, legal pressure, even though he settled financially with Giuffre before, while still denying everything.
What new details or specific claims does the memoir make about Prince Andrew?
Well, Giuffre reiterates having sexual relations with Andrew on 3 occasions. But the most shocking part, perhaps, is the description of one encounter as an orgy. This apparently happened on Epstein's private island. She claims Andrew, Epstein, and about 8 other young women were all present. Following this renewed public outcry, Andrew has now apparently agreed to stop using the Duke of York title and give up various other royal roles and privileges. One's granted by his late mother, the Queen. It's another step back from public life for him.
Okay, moving from that very human scandal to, a different kind of potential existential threat. Technology. There seems to be this huge, coordinated global pushback happening against the future of artificial intelligence. We're seeing reports that over 700 scientists, political figures, even celebrities like Prince Harry, have signed this public call to basically halt the development of what they call superintelligence artificial, AI that goes beyond human brain power.
Yeah, and the core fear here isn't just about robots taking jobs, though that's part of it. It's fundamentally about control. Many scientists are worried that once an AI actually reaches that superintelligence level, its goals, its decision-making, it could become totally unknowable, totally unpredictable to us humans who created it. Calling for a halt is almost like a desperate plea for a pause button, a chance to figure out regulations before the tech races past our ability to actually manage it.
And that fear, that anxiety about uncontrollable AI, it's already leading to actual regulations, isn't it? India, for example, just decided they're going to require social media platforms to be transparent about any content generated by AI.
That's a really crucial step, actually. It goes beyond just flagging fake news. It means explicit labeling. Users have to know if that image, that text, that video they're seeing was made by a machine. It's a direct response to the immediate threat, deep fakes, mass misinformation. It sort of acknowledges that, okay, maybe we can't stop the AI from advancing completely, but we absolutely must demand accountability for what it produces. And this whole theme, this global feeling of uncertainty, whether it's military, moral, or technological, it sets the stage quite well, actually, as we turn our focus now to El Salvador.
Indeed. Let's bring it home now to El Salvador's national headlines. And here, it's a really mixed picture, isn't it? The economy is showing some incredibly strong numbers, especially money coming in. But those positive signs are definitely shadowed by some pretty stark challenges in security, and especially the justice system.
Right. Let's look at the money first, because those macro numbers are solid. Exports, for instance. Through September, they were up 5.7% compared to last year. That's over $5,137 million. Now, September itself was actually down slightly compared to September 2024, but the overall 9-month trend, it still points towards resilience, maybe even expansion in trade.
But the number that just leaps off the page, the one that really defines the whole economic structure right now, it's remittances. The money sent home by Salvadorans abroad, it has absolutely exploded, up a massive 18.5% in just the first 9 months of this year, 2025.
Yeah.
That brings the total to over $7,354.3 million. I mean, that figure, it's not just a bonus. It feels like the absolute bedrock of the entire economy right now.
It absolutely is. That inflow from the diaspora, it's pumping huge amounts of liquidity into the domestic market. You can't overstate its importance. And alongside that, the government's clearly making efforts to boost another income stream. Tourism. We saw First Lady Gabriela de Bukele signing a cooperation deal just this week with ONU Turismo, that's the UN's World Tourism Organization. And the market seems to be noticing. We're hearing reports about Panamanian companies looking seriously at El Salvador's tourism potential. Plus, the Salvador Hotel Corporation just announced plans for 2 new hotels, so signs of investment there.
And you can see the infrastructure work happening too, can't you? That big push to revitalize the historic center in San Salvador seems to be moving ahead quickly, with the central government and the mayor's office working together.
Yeah, and backing up that physical revitalization is an effort to sort of clean up the urban core structurally. They've set up a special commission now authorized to basically identify buildings in the historic center that are dangerous, structurally unsound, and then demolish them. It's about removing those physical barriers to safety and hopefully to more long-term investment down the line.
Okay, now, let's pivot to security, because this is where you get that really stark duality. On one hand, the government is highlighting this incredible statistic, 1,040 days without any homicides recorded under their big security plan. That's unprecedented, really.
And that drop in the sort of traditional gang-related homicide rate, it's undeniable. It has transformed daily life and stability for many people, that's clear. However, the data also shows where violence hasn't been eliminated. And the key countermetric here is violence against women. Reports indicate 20 feminicides and other violent deaths of women just in 2025 so far. It really underlines that while the government might have crushed the systemic power of the gangs, that deeper issue of gender-based violence, it's still a massive, unresolved problem for society.
And the justice system is trying to process these cases. We see that. Like, there was a recent 23-year prison sentence for an MS-13 member. Rape and threats against a minor up in Chalatenango. But when you zoom out and look at the sheer scale of the regime of exception, how is the judicial system possibly coping with the numbers?
That's the critical question, isn't it? The strain, the capacity issue, it looks immense. Bordering on an institutional crisis, frankly. Our sources are suggesting that there are only about 291 prosecutors currently assigned to handle, get this, 82,078 individuals processed under the regime of exception. Just think about that ratio for a second. 291 people responsible for the cases, the lives of over 82,000 others. That kind of pressure cooker environment. It doesn't just mean delays. It fundamentally risks undermining the ability to guarantee thorough due process for everyone. It raises really serious questions about the fairness, the reliability, and maybe even the long-term legitimacy of these mass proceedings.
And some cases really stand out, showing how severe detention can be, even when it's not directly tied to, say, gang activity. The transport businessman, Catalino Miranda, he's still locked up, isn't he, after 12,272 days now, 5 different charges. And this all followed that very public warning from President Bukele way back in 2022.
Yeah, the Miranda case just keeps ticking along. It remains this very visible symbol, really. A demonstration of the administration's willingness to go after figures seen as maybe defying government authority, regardless of their business clout.
Now, moving to something incredibly serious, a potential humanitarian crisis that really needs urgent attention. Reports are starting to surface from families. They're claiming that 6 Salvadorans who were deported back from the United States have basically vanished upon their return. They're saying authorities are denying them any information about where these people are.
This is deeply, deeply disturbing if true. We have this specific account, for instance, of one family. They actually came back to El Salvador after 9 years away in the U.S. purely to look for their relative, a 24-year-old named Irvin. He was deported back in March. What these families are alleging is that deportees are being picked up, detained, essentially right upon arrival, put into prisons, but without proper records being kept or without families being notified. If that's happening systemically, it points to a major failure in tracking returnees. And it raises just massive human rights alarms about what's happening to these citizens when they're sent back.
And adding to that concern, the tragic case of Professor Manuel Mira. He died just 22 days after being released from prison. His family's been very public, very vocal, claiming he was mistreated, suffered maltreatment while he was inside.
And he's the second teacher, isn't he, reported to have died after being arrested under the regime just in the last 2 months. These deaths, combined with these allegations about disappeared deportees, it puts enormous pressure back on the government. Pressure to be transparent, to be accountable for the conditions inside these detention centers, and for how people held under these emergency powers are actually being treated.
Okay, and just quickly on a slightly less heavy national note, the weather. Civil Protection has downgraded the alert level back to green across the country. Looks like the immediate threat from Tropical Storm Melissa has passed. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we connect this to the bigger picture, remember that if you find this deep dive valuable, you can collaborate or donate. Your support through PayPal or the Bitcoin QR code helps us maintain the consistency and quality of this analysis. You can also advertise your product or service through this space. Check the description for details.
Right, so let's pivot now to that unique financial angle in El Salvador. The whole Bitcoin situation and also those broader economic critiques we were touching on. I mean, given El Salvador's status as, the Bitcoin nation, the price of Bitcoin today, October 22nd, 2025, it's obviously a huge point of interest. Highly anticipated, constantly discussed.
Yeah, you can see it in the search traffic, can't you? The sheer number of people trying to get that up-to-the-minute quote. It just underlines how central Bitcoin is now, not just as like a speculative asset, but as an actual piece of national monetary policy.
Absolutely. That constant monitoring, the need to track its stability, its volatility. That's just the daily reality now. But, beyond just the price swings on the global markets, we are also seeing these ongoing efforts inside El Salvador to try and build out the ecosystem. Things like education programs, Node Nation, I think one is called, aimed at boosting local understanding and adoption. So that suggests there's still this sustained commitment to actually integrating Bitcoin into the national fabric, regardless of what the price is doing day to day.
Okay, but let's circle back to those absolutely huge remittance figures we talked about and the decent export growth. Because at the same time, we have economists raising some pretty loud alarm bells about the pension system. The critics are basically saying that the recent reforms, well, they're not actually going to fix the fundamental problem. They won't deliver dignified pensions, as they put it, or really expand coverage significantly for older people.
And this is where you really hit that structural vulnerability, isn't it? Right underneath that shiny surface of positive inflow numbers. The core fiscal truth seems to be that the government is taking on significantly more debt just to cover the pension payments for current retirees. It's like a short-term fix, a Band-Aid maybe. But it doesn't solve the long-term solvency issue of the whole system, and it raises these really critical, really uncomfortable questions about the country's fiscal health decades from now.
So wait, if the government's relying on more debt to pay its bills internally, like pensions, and at the same time, the whole economy is leaning so heavily on that $7.3 billion plus coming in from remittances, money earned by citizens who had to leave the country to find work, does this massive reliance on migration actually signal a kind of hidden economic weakness? Is it masking deeper problems, even while it looks like a success on paper?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it? And among many economists and analysts, the answer is leaning towards a pretty strong yes. That huge remittance inflow, while obviously fantastic for putting cash in people's pockets right now, it just reinforces this argument that migration isn't temporary anymore. It's become a permanent structural feature of El Salvador's internal economy. The money coming from abroad is essentially plugging the gaps left by a lack of maybe domestic fiscal sustainability. Especially in crucial areas like the pension system, it creates this profound dependence, particularly on the health of the United States job market, which means El Salvador's national stability becomes increasingly tied to the economic ups and downs of another country rather than its own internal engine. That's $7.3 billion. You could argue it's both the country's biggest economic success story right now and also the clearest sign of its most serious structural vulnerability.
Okay, so if we try to connect all these threads, pull it all together for the bigger picture, what we've seen today is this global landscape just simmering with tension, right? From the United States pushing these really aggressive new legal arguments for military action against cartels in the Pacific, to that incredibly complex geopolitical dance between Trump and Putin, with Ukraine just caught right in the crossfire. Then you look domestically at El Salvador, and you see this almost dazzling economic performance on the surface, those remittances pouring in, exports holding up. But underneath that, these deep shadows, the justice system groaning under the weight of tens of thousands of cases with barely any prosecutors, and these really painful humanitarian stories emerging, the disappeared deportees, the allegations of mistreatment leading to deaths in custody.
The contrast is just incredibly stark, isn't it? A nation seeming to experience simultaneously remarkable economic buoyancy and profound structural fragility.
And that structural fragility, that reliance on forces outside its own borders, maybe that's the thought to leave you, the listener, with today. When you see that record $7.3 billion flowing in from remittances, should we view that purely as a foundation for sustainable economic growth? Or does it actually reveal something more fundamental, a structural flaw perhaps, where national prosperity becomes increasingly and maybe dangerously dependent on citizens having to leave the country to find opportunity? It's a really tough question about national sovereignty versus external reliance, something we all need to think about. To continue providing consistency and quality to the deep dive analysis, we remind you of the ways to collaborate or donate through PayPal and Bitcoin QR, and that you could pay for your advertising. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.